You might be wondering what type of grains and how many of them you should be feeding to your dairy sheep. And you're not alone. When we got started, we had such a hard time finding this information too. We brought home our dairy sheep, and initially we asked the person we bought them from what to feed and how much. And the answer was give them corn, about 2 pounds. And we did that, and either we bought the wrong kind of corn or they were just not interested in getting corn from us, but it just did not work. They didn't eat it. So now we have a type of grain that works for our dairy sheep, and I'll tell you exactly what's in it, as well as different options that you might consider and how much of it to feed to your dairy sheep. I'm Natalie Lucier here at Waykeeper Farm and Nerdery, and we have dairy sheep, we have chickens and geese and ducks, and we also have this awesome greenhouse, and you'll definitely find videos about all of these topics here on this channel. But today I'm talking about grains for dairy sheep. So in our case, we tried a bunch of different types of grain mixes, and we even talked to the folks at the granary where we buy our grains from, and we asked them, what should we feed sheep? What should we feed dairy animals? And their answer was just, you should try different things until you find what works, which was a little bit frustrating. And I think I get where they're coming from, because it's true, not all animals will appreciate all different types of grains. So we need to find out what's going to work for your dairy sheep, especially thinking about your context and what you're able to get locally. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is how much to feed. Are you overfeeding or underfeeding? Because grains are kind of a tricky thing to figure out when it comes to your animals, and I'm going to answer all of these questions. Now, full disclosure and warning, I am not a sheep nutritionist. I do not have a degree in agriculture or farming, and all of this is really just from our experience, from testing, trial and error, and also just from reading a lot of forums and books and things like that. So definitely just take our advice with a grain of salt and figure out what works for your sheep in your local context. And another quick word of warning, if you're introducing grains to your sheep, do it very slowly. And even if they have eaten grains in the past, if you're switching to a different type of grain, your sheep may not have all of the rumen bacteria and all the things that they need to really digest that type of grain. And this can cause all kinds of issues like bloating and digestion problems. And so you really want to go slow and just start with a really small amount of grains before you up it to those bigger amounts that I'm going to recommend later. Let's talk about how much sheep actually need grains or not. So first of all, sheep are grazing animals. So that means they really thrive when they're eating fresh forage out on pasture, or if they're eating hay. These are the things that they really need. They are the foundation to their diet, to their health, to their nutrition. So make sure that that is the core of the diet that they're eating. We are not talking about feeding 100% grains to your animals here. I am a huge proponent of rotational grazing as well as grass feeding your animals. So this is more of a supplement that we're talking about here when I'm talking about adding grains to your sheep's diet. So on our farm, we make sure that our sheep have access to really good quality alfalfa hay in the winter if we can get our hands on it, and then also a good variety of pasture throughout the spring, summer, and fall months. Now, interestingly enough, not all sheep on our farm need grains. And so the two that really don't need grains are our ram and our wether, who is a castrated male. So the reason we don't overdo the grains with them is because it can really cause them to put on too much weight and also cause other degenerative issues as well, because it really does affect how they do, because they're not, super busy doing, things like growing a baby or making milk. So they really don't need a ton of grains. However, we do give them a super tiny amount every day, and that's really just to keep them friendly with us so that they'll follow us using our bucket method. And if you're not sure how to train sheep, watch that video now. But that to us is really just to basically, treat them a little bit, make sure that they still follow us and treat us well, and that we treat them well too. Now, when it comes to dairy sheep, the ewes or the female sheep are really the ones that need the most grain. And that comes in for a couple of reasons. So first, grains help them meet their nutritional needs, because right before they get bred, and as well as when they're pregnant, there is so much energy that goes into producing babies. So we want to make sure that they're really healthy, they are not missing anything when it comes to nutrition, and so that really helps cover all of our bases. Now, at the same time, we don't want to feed too many grains to our pregnant ewes, because that means they'll have large lambs that are too hard to birth on their own. So it's a fine balance. We don't want to just give them a free rein to as many grains as they want. We want them to have a good amount of grains every day so that they're growing well, the babies are growing well, and also not so much that it becomes an issue when it comes time to lamb. And the second reason is that grains help produce more milk. So the dairy sheep that we have been bred, it's a breed of dairy sheep, and they rely on grains to produce more milk. And if you have a different type of breed of sheep that maybe don't have this kind of predisposition to relying on grains to produce milk, then you might not need to feed as much grain. But the sheep that we have, which is British milking sheep and Lacoon sheep, they require a certain amount of grains to produce the milk, and that really keeps them in a healthy body condition. Otherwise, they will get too skinny and they will not be healthy while they're being milked or while they're feeding their lambs. All right, so let's get into it. What do we put in our grain mix? So we have a mix that we buy at a local granary, and it includes oats, corn, soy, alfalfa pellets, and molasses, and it comes up to a 16% protein mix. So if you are looking for dairy feeds, you might be able to see different percentage for protein when it comes to the different mixes, and so we are looking for the highest protein percentage, and so 16% is the highest that we can find here locally at our granary, and that's what we go for. Now the molasses makes it a little bit sweeter and stickier, and our sheep actually enjoy it better because of that, and I think some of the items are also roasted or ground down, so it's not just whole grains in all of those mixes. So you'll definitely want to take a look at what's available for you locally. Now on top of this mix, we also add a little bit of flaxseed, some seaweed powder, as well as some powdered garlic. These are things that we consider to be supplements, so garlic is very healthy and it is a good preventative for worms, and then seaweed is just another great supplement, and so is flaxseed. So how much volume of these mixes do we feed? So when our ewes are dry and pregnant, so that means kind of just regular, not being milked, then we give them 2 feedings per day at about half a pound each, and that's per sheep. However, when they're in milk and we're actively milking them, they're feeding their lambs, then we bump that up to about 4 pounds per day, and that is fed depending on how often we're milking. So if we're milking twice, we'll try to split that, or they might even get more when they're on the milking stand, and sometimes they won't finish. So it really does depend on their production, how they're feeling, and how hungry they are. So we really think that we worked up to this. This is not something that we do from day one, but it is something that our dairy sheep expect. They do expect to have a good amount of grains when they're in milk. So when they're on the feeding stand, we give them those grains, and when they're down, then they can eat grass and pasture. Now, if you're curious about the milking process and you want to find out how to hand milk sheep like a pro, then watch this video now.